Hey, what's happening? Hello, Abe.
Hi everybody, it's 314 React here, and today we are looking at Munch's Oddysee, which came out on the 15th of November 2001 for the original Xbox. It was re-released in 2010 on Steam, and there was also a HD version that was released for PS3, and that was released on December 19th, 2012, and the HD version also had its assets ported over to the PC version in 2016. And that's the version we're playing now. There's also a version for the Nintendo Switch that was released on May 14th, 2020. Now, the very first time I played this would have been around March or April 2003 when I first got my Xbox. Now, I loved the first two games, and this game has a lot of nostalgia for me, but this is generally where a lot of people think the franchise kind of started going downhill a little bit, and I kind of agree. One of the first things you'll notice is that the game speak only has game speak for Abe and Munch. In the original game, Oddysee, I think it had game speak for Abe and the Sligs, and then Exodus had game speak for Abe, Sligs, Gluckins, Scrabs, and Paramites. And the game speak is not quite as good this time. I find a little bit more simplified, and this is what we're going to find with quite a lot of the mechanics in this game, is that they've simplified it down. So let's dive in. So of course this is where the franchise went 3D. The original game kind of had like a silent tutorial where it just introduced you to the mechanics of the game, and the mechanics were so tight in the original game that you had all these puzzles to figure out with it, and you learnt the rules of the game, learnt the exceptions to the rules where there were, whereas this seems a little bit more like Super Mario 3D. And of course, you know, there's loads of these explicit tutorials here, and you're collecting spoofs. There's no real collectibles in the original. This one's a lot more combat orientated as well. So even this first area, you just have to kind of walk around collecting spoofs, and you have to collect 50 of them, which isn't the most exciting thing. Whereas the beginning of Abe's Oddysee was immediately being chased by a Slig, and then Abe's Exodus was starting off with the amazing pre-rendered background of the Necrom mines. So let's skip past this area. There's also quite a lot of loading in this game, but here we are. We're on the outside bit now, which simultaneously looks great, but also terrible at the same time. Because obviously the originals had the pre-rendered backgrounds, so you'd have real huge distances in the background that you'd see in these amazing worlds. Whereas here, they're trying to kind of emulate that or simulate that in 3D, but of course 3D just wasn't powerful enough at the time, so you kind of end up with these heavily fogged areas and the old school sort of sky there. So you can imagine if you're playing the original game and you were to have it in 2D and you'd have Abe standing here, you can kind of see what they're getting at. Doesn't look too realistic. It literally just is a skybox sphere with a texture rotating around it. But at the same time, this looks amazing, because it's that GeForce 3, original Xbox era, late 90s, early 2000s graphics, and it has a kind of surreal look to it. It's more akin to the sort of Halo previews, you know, back in the Macworld sort of days. So it's got that sort of feeling to it, and it's got the nostalgia. But in terms of actual visual fidelity for a console that's far more powerful than the PS1, it doesn't look as good. And being in HD exaggerates that. And I think this is at 4K, but there's not much configuration. Well, there's no graphics configuration at all. So this is just pure default. Now this does look slightly better than it did on the Xbox, obviously because of the high resolution, but you also got high resolution textures and the high resolution models of the characters. And the other thing with this game is that the sort of brutality of the deaths, not quite what it was. In the original game, if you were to step on a mine or get shot, you'd be pretty much dead instantly, whereas here, you're just, you know, blown back a little bit and you lose a bit of health. So there's still an atmosphere to this game, there's still a weird ambience to it, but it's not anywhere near what the original game had. And then of course you have the repeated noises of the characters here. And then the camera going crazy. So you can hear some music here, but it's more ambient. In the original games, there was always music, and it was always very unique to each area, and each area was extremely unique as well, like Rupture Farms, Monsaic Lines, Scrabania, the Scrabanian Temple, Paramonia, the Paramonian Temple, Necrum, the Soulstorm Brewery. This game, I think, had a very rushed development, so there's kind of basically two types of area. Outdoor grassy area like this, which is kind of reminiscent of Paramonia, and an indoor factory area or a lab area. And instead of the kind of exciting rule-based gameplay that escalates and escalates, where you figure out puzzles and use your abilities, you know, by this time in Abe's Oddysee, you're possessing a slig, you're rescuing a couple of Madokans, you're going past the mines, you may even find a secret area. But here, at this point, you're in the same green area, throwing Madokans over a little wall. It's not really a puzzle, it's just kind of a time waster. Of course, you've already opened a door like this earlier, now you're just doing the same thing again, and then you go through to another area that's green. And again, you can kind of see what they're getting at. You can imagine if this was 2D, what it would look like in the original games. But again, that fog in the background, because it just couldn't handle the render distance with the engine they were using. I think if they optimized the game a bit more or used a better engine, I think they could have had a lot more depth to it, because Halo didn't have this sort of fog in the background and had a lot more higher res textures, bump mapping, a lot more going on with the graphics, and a longer draw distance by far. So it's not like as if the hardware couldn't handle it. Now I believe this is most likely because it was originally planned to be made for the PS2, so I think they started work on it in 1998, straight after Exodus. So that must mean they started work on some elements of it, and maybe they got their hands on a PS2 SDK, and then they ported it over to Xbox, which is probably why there's so many graphical limitations. Not that that's an entirely bad thing, because it's kind of surreal, ambient, and scary, but it does not compare to the pre-rendered graphics of the original. You can hear some sligs over there. So again, they're trying to simulate what the original game did, where you could hear a slig off-screen. Kind of hear the soundtrack here. And yeah, it just doesn't have that unique sound to let you know the area you're in. It's constantly interrupted by sound effects as well, so if you just listen for a second. Scratching, scratching, scratching. And again, here we go, got to collect more spruce. Now you can regrow spruce by chanting over it, and you get these really nice little old school particle effects, which look quite awesome, I'm not going to lie, even though they are just kind of sprites. But they still have that nostalgic look. And I also do like the fact that there's shadows from the clouds going over. That is a pretty cool effect, and does make the world have a little bit more depth to it. So here we get to some slogs and some sligs. This is where the kind of threats in the game of the enemies are nowhere near as intense as they used to be. Oh god, I'm under attack. So you can just send Madokans in now to beat up sligs and slogs. But of course in the original, a slog could take you out instantly and take a Madokan out instantly. So the kind of threat of the world is majorly reduced. One of the things I do remember, these signs here looked incredible back in the day, because it was like a really nice texture that back on the PS1 you just wouldn't get. Now you get some more nice little particle effects here as we pick up some caffeine, which makes you run fast. So these power-ups, kind of based on the Soulstorm Brew machines in Exodus. And they do various things like make you jump higher, run faster, which again feels kind of out of place for an Oddworld game. And here's where the controls feel a little bit too loose, and again it's frustrating just having to run around collecting spooks. The jump as well is very, very loose and doesn't feel right, because the original was a cinematic platformer, so everything was very tightly done, jumps felt heavy and weighted, you knew exactly what was going to happen, and it was kind of predictable as well once you got used to the controls, whereas this one, the predictability starts to drop off, and I think that's especially prevalent in the new game Soulstorm as well, from what I've seen, and that, you know, when you do a jump, it doesn't always quite go the way you think it's going to go, the way you think it's going to go, whereas the original, if you messed up 9 times out of 10, it was your fault. So here we are on the Munch section. This area just looked incredible to me years ago, because I'd never seen graphics like this before, and through a CRT, even with the low resolution textures and models, it just looked absolutely incredible, and probably still would. So I don't want to make this a video where I'm just purely bashing the game, because there's a lot of good elements to it, even outside of the nostalgia. The development was quite tumultuous and rushed, and I think they had quite a few issues, so you can kind of tell where they had to rush certain parts of it and just pad the gameplay out in certain areas. There was still a lot of good ideas though. Now this is an example of where it's kind of repetitive. You're just going around pressing the same button over and over again, rescuing fuzzles here. And then the sounds are very repetitive on the attacks. The attacks themselves are very repetitive. The satisfying feeling of rescuing the friendly creatures in the game is nowhere near as good. Everything's just less impactful. Now this is where it gets really repetitive with the attacks, because you grab this drink here, which gives you the zap capability from Munch, and you have to go down here, and it takes ages. And there we go, finally. So you can tell why people were disappointed. I felt somewhat disappointed at the time, but I think at the time that I was kind of overtaken by the excitement of having a brand new Xbox, seeing these incredible graphics. Because prior to this, I just had a PS1, and I wanted an Xbox for so long, and I got it with Jet Set Radio Future, Sega GT 2002, and Munch's Oddysee. And just seeing these graphics, just seeing that amazing console, which I still have now, I think that kind of overrode a lot of the disappointment for me. But one thing that is incredible is the water effect here. Look at that. Nice bump map on the water there. Oh, that looks good. And so here, this is kind of a nice, cool area. More of that sort of bump mapping, which I imagine is where they started to utilize the shaders on the Xbox. Oh, that looks good. And that looked incredible at the time, because at the time I had a PC that wouldn't have been able to do these sort of graphics, at least not in a full game anyway. And here we see the kind of awkward jumping again, trying to get on that little post is kind of frustrating. And while this area looks cool at first, once you see this area, you're going to see this area again many, many, many more times in the game, because as I said, there's only basically 2 areas in this game. And again, we're going around collecting spoofs. The music here, just kind of a basic sort of ambient sound of the water, and then there's a slight sort of ambient music track playing in the background, but nothing quite unique. And there's no real puzzle here either, there's just kind of a slog that you have to avoid, and there's no real clever way around it, like there would be in the original games, where you'd be introduced to an enemy and how they operate, and then be slowly introduced to more and more complicated scenarios with those enemies, where you'd have to use the rules of those enemies to figure out how to get past the screens of the game. You know, like tricking a slig into a mine, possessing a slig, tricking a slig to fall down a hole by chasing you, timing certain puzzles right. None of that's really here. It's just sort of running away from enemies or killing them in various ways. Oh, these controls are so frustrating. Oh god, you got to collect 100 spoofs. Okay. Just keep pressing the button over and over again while you're electrocuting this guy here. Oh god. Oh god. Oh, but look at that bump mapping. Oh, that looks great. I think all they needed to do was add a little bit more specular shine to the metal floors, and it would have looked even better. It also feels a lot more like a video game than the original 2 did, which sounds kind of obvious because it is a video game, but you know, the point of some video games is that it's supposed to feel a little bit more realistic, and Abe's Oddysee and Abe's Exodus felt like their own unique world, whereas this definitely feels like a video game with, you know, collectibles all strewn about ready for you to collect. See, the same button to free the fuzzles and the same button to activate switches is the jump button. So you end up jumping when you want to pull a switch. If you get it right, you can electrocute these guys and throw them in the water or get them to explode on the mines. See, it's the same sort of area over and over again, but you're not really escalating the puzzle or the challenge from what you've learned. It's just sort of go through, avoid the mines, collect the spoofs, go through, avoid more mines, collect more spoofs. Oh yes, the health isn't calculated by spoofs. You press left on the D-pad and you can see the little birds there, which is how much life you have. So when you get hit, you lose a bird. I'm not sure how many birds you start off with, but I've got 2 left, which means I imagine I have 2 hit points left. Whoa! Oh no. Luckily the respawns aren't too bad. Now this is an area where it's actually pretty awesome. You can actually remote control some of these robots and blow a whole load of things up, which is awesome. This unique thing that Munch can do because of the electrode in his head that you can use to interact with certain systems, so you can take over robots like this. So it's kind of analogous to Abe's possession ability, and these are the parts of the game that are kind of awesome, and I can see why people like it. But again, it is falling into that sort of video gamey territory of explosive barrels and stuff like that. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just that the originals didn't have that sort of video gamey feel, but this does make for quite a satisfying area. Although you kind of tell they started to run out of assets or time, because of course that is just the same slig leg sound. Now you could argue that the technology they use is just the same, but it does seem like they may have run out of time to make new sounds. And also the sounds are recycled from the first 2 games. So this is where we see a bit more of the humour in the game, in the cutscene. Now the original games obviously had humour in them, but this one takes the humour in a bit of a different direction. Maybe goes a little bit far with it.
I'm not so sure about this.
Come on, Abe. You want to kick that?
Oh, and of course the Madokans have teeth now, which is odd.
Yeah, but don't you think that's way too high?
Looks fine to us. Piece of cake, Abe.
Here goes.
But this is where Abe and Munch
Whoa, that's
meet up.
high for me.
See, in these pre-rendered scenes, you can kind of see kind of how they could have gone if they had pre-rendered the backgrounds with a 2D game. And the kind of areas you could have had. Because obviously this is a huge airship, but I don't think they ever really utilized that. Because obviously there's not enough 3D rendering, you can't render a huge airship and all the complexities of the platforms, as well as a huge landscape in the background on the original Xbox or the PS2 as it was originally been developed for. So, we have met up with Abe here. Yeah, there's quite a lot of videos out there that will go over Munch's Oddysee and how it's not as good as the other games and the sort of decline of the Oddworld games, but I do want to keep to the good parts and to the nostalgia for this, and this part is really cool. The sun coming through the trees there, the fact that you're meeting another character, you know, Munch and Abe together, and it's where you can flick between the characters, kind of like GTA 5, but 12 years before that. Just, it looks so good, it's so nostalgic. But then again, you're in an area where you need to collect 5 spoofs. Personally, I think they should have kept with the game being 2D and just used the high fidelity of the Xbox to make high-res 2D game, which would have been really, really good looking. They could have maintained the tightness of the original 2, but taken it up a notch. So again, we're kind of in a greeny outside area again, which is very, very similar to the first area, with a little bit more of an industrial sort of look to it. Uh-oh. So you use spoofs to build up a possession orb, and then you can move that orb around and take enemies over, which is awesome. And it's also awesome to see Sligs in full 3D. What isn't awesome is the repetitive chanting sound there. Oh, but here we go. Up close you can see the newer HD model of Abe, which I believe is taken from the cutscene rendering. But yeah, that is a pretty nice model. Of course, it's not what the original game would have looked like. It's using a higher definition model and high definition textures. Oh, there's still some glitches with it. This is the level you can see how Abe and Munch work together. You need Abe to throw Munch over this wall, and you need Abe to possess the Sligs, but then you need Munch to swim over the waters and activate certain areas so that you can get past. And here's where the jumping gets a bit frustrating. But let's grab a zap. Again, this is where you have to just basically electrocute an enemy. Difficult to even jump up there, but there you go. Also, there's a lot less gore in this version as well. The original ones were pretty gory when you blew stuff up. So you can use the fuzzles in clever ways like this, like freeing them through the wall. And the Madokans won't follow Munch, they'll only follow Abe, so again you have to flick between the two. You've also got a nice little shadow mapped shadow there, which is quite cool. I don't think it was that high res on the original Xbox, but it still looked pretty great. Now this is another part where it's awesome, because you can remote control this grabber here, which reminds me of the grabber from Doom 3. What you can do is just drop all these explosive barrels on enemies, and because there's physics, you can kind of throw them at the enemy, which is awesome. And they constantly respawn as well. The only trouble is that the mines respawn. So you can never fully clear out a minefield in this game. Oh, look at those old particle effects. Uh-oh. Oh boy. And here we have the combat Madokans. Does again make the world feel a little bit less dangerous when the Madokans can fight back. Oh god, and then you get stuck on the geometry. There you go. Luckily when Munch dies, you can resurrect him by going to this egg, and there you go. So here we are in the Slog Hut 1027, which is kind of like similar naming structure to Rupture Farms 1029, I believe. So this is, yeah, supposed to be obviously another little factory area, but compared to the sort of scale you see of Rupture Farms, Necrom Mines, Soulstorm Brewery, stuff like that, none of these areas can compare. You don't see these huge factories, these unimaginably huge factories in the distance, and it makes Oddworld feel like a smaller place. Now again, this is because of the limitations of the game engine. However, this area is quite fun because, as you can see, there's a big recycling blade and you can just drop enemies into it, which is actually where there is a bit of gore. So when you blow enemies up, they don't explode into gore, but when you chuck them into this, they do turn into gore. And you can even, if you want, drop a Madokan into here and have them taken out by a slog. Now there is a karma system in the game, so the less friendlies you save, the worse your karma gets and the worse ending you get. And areas like this kind of do have a unique feel to them. Again, it's that Xbox feeling, that early 2000s graphics feeling. And this is an example of a kind of puzzle area. We have to figure out how to get past it, get Abe up there, and it unveils a new area. Oh, I do quite like that. That looks awesome. I still do love that ambient music, don't get me wrong. It's got a really surreal feeling to it. And because I haven't implemented anything in the drivers, like any anti-aliasing or anything like that, you can still see there's what looks to be trilinear texture filtering there, which gives it that Xbox sort of feel. Now, here we come to the sort of factory areas that you see consistently throughout this game. It looks like the draw distance is a bit longer here, which is strange. And you can imagine, if you were to render this game in 2D, like the originals, you can see the kind of depth they're going for, and how they're trying to build factories and the areas like the original games. But again, it doesn't quite come together. Now this area is quite frustrating as well. This is actually the area where I stopped playing a few years ago, because you have to run back and forward, I think rescuing Madokans between all of these sligs here. And of course you can't just possess them, because you need Spoos to build up your possession orb, and then you make a mistake like that, drop down, and then land in front of loads of sligs. But yeah, you need all of these Madokans here, so you're going to need 6 Madokans to open this door and get to the end. Yeah, you take the espresso, and then you can run back and forth. Oh god, oh god. So you kind of see the idea here. And the Madokans aren't following me out of it, only 2 followed me out. Oh, they're going to die, aren't they? Yep. And this is kind of trying to look like the platforms that are in the original game. So again, you can kind of see what they're going for. Trying to recreate that sort of... Oh god damn it. That sort of world, but in 3D, but in limited 3D. Because you can do that now. You can make the backgrounds incredibly complicated now, as you can see in Soulstorm. But I still don't think moving this game to 3D was the right idea. I think there's nothing wrong with keeping a game 2D. Some games can transition to 2D, like Mario and Zelda, but I think some games should just stick to it. Oh my god, and I keep falling off this bit, and now I'm going to die. Oh boy. Oh no. See, this part always frustrates me. But again, we get to another fun bit here, where we can indeed blow a lot more sligs up. Just wish there's more satisfying areas like this. Or just more focus on possession as well. There's something about those old school particle effects. There's something about these graphics, even how the textures look. Like I said, it's just very GeForce 3 is how I describe it. So we're taking out all the sligs here. Again, the music is just the same sort of ambient loop over and over again that we've heard a number of times. So by this point, you have seen pretty much all the areas of the game and the ambience to them for the most part. In fact, I think I know what you need to... Oh. So unfortunately the game crashed and I lost quite a lot of progress, so we're back to the Madokan pens from a while back. Now playing this game again is really interesting because there's a lot of nostalgia to it, but there's something about playing it on PC that's not as good as the original Xbox because it's lacking that extra element to the nostalgia. And yeah, you really do realise the limitations to the game. It's also not as memorable as the other games. All the other games had very memorable areas and very memorable parts to the cutscenes and music and everything, but this just doesn't have that. It all kind of blurs into one. And this is when I pretty much stopped playing the Oddworld games. I did play a bit of Stranger's Wrath, and I played New and Tasty. New and Tasty I wasn't too impressed with, but it was still cool, but I'd still rather go back to the original 2. Which is a shame, because I think there was a lot of potential for these games, and I think they should have kept them 2D. But that's not to, you know, completely downplay the amount of effort that must have gone into this. A lot of development time must have gone into this, and it must have been very difficult for the devs. So you can appreciate that. And there are good parts to the game. Oh. And there are some parts that are funny, like that. And I've also not played Soulstorm either. I think the addition of the crafting elements in that just kind of put me off a little bit, and it generally looks a little bit buggy. But what I'm going to do now is skip ahead and look at a cutscene, I believe just after this level, and we're going to analyse that. Cutscenes were lacking a little bit of something as well that the original had. Of course, yep, here's the sort of news report that replaces the Magog on the March from Exodus.
It's about time, Stitchlets. I see you found our one-legged friend. You will help each other find what is most important to each of you.
I don't get it.
Save his unborn brothers from Viker's labs. You will go to Viker's labs.
So there's always a bit of cartoony humour in the first two, but I think this goes a little bit too far with it.
Last can of this priceless dish. Lulu. Huh? He is your key to enter Viker's labs. You must make Lulu rich. He will rise to the status of Glockstar. Through this poor excuse for a being,
It's not as much gravitas. That's the key thing, gravitas.
Help Lulu. And then...
That's it? That's the big message?
So, there we go. Like I said, it lacks gravitas, essentially, which is what the original 2 games had in spades. I did play this game a few years ago. I think in 2012 it got released for Android. And yeah, I remember playing that on my Nexus 4 tablet. And I remember enjoying it then. Again, probably through quite a lot of nostalgia. I did play it a few months ago on my original Xbox. I did get trapped in that same area again. I think I know the solution to it. It becomes a bit of a chore when you have to keep picking up the sligs and chucking them on mines. Then you have to go and get the Medokans and maneuver them through the mines and then pick them up with the grabber and then move them to open the door at the end, which leads to the end of the level, which again is a really small level, really. And I think what happened is they designed the levels to quite a limited size and then had to pad them out so you couldn't get through them too quickly, and that results in quite a lot of the repetitive chore-like gameplay. Good fun playthrough for the most part, but again it does kind of expose the issues the game has. And I may try and play Stranger's Wrath at some point as well, as that is on Steam. So yeah, let me know what you think. Did you play this game back in the day? What sort of nostalgia does it have for you? Does it match up to the original games to you? I mean, some people really love this game and that's awesome. For me, it just doesn't quite match up to the originals. Have you played it recently without any nostalgia from that era? Let me know in the comments, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, there's always new videos on games and technology. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.